My name is Sarah Anderson, and for the longest time, my family saw me as the struggling one, the one taking those little investment courses, while my sister, Olivia, climbed the corporate ladder. They thought I was barely making ends meet, renting a small apartment, a quiet disappointment in their otherwise perfectly curated world. The truth I just discovered, the real reason why I let them believe that for a decade. It wasn't just about protecting my peace. It was about protecting an empire they couldn't even fathom. That day, I had no idea that one conversation, one more condescending remark from Olivia would unravel everything. One moment, I was the family charity case, the next. Well, let's just say multiple truths were about to be revealed, truths that would shatter their reality and mine. I've always been a private person, almost pathologically so, and showing this side of myself, this raw, unedited story, feels like standing naked in a snowstorm. But I have to share it, because I know I'm not the only one. If you've ever experienced being underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel small by the very people who are supposed to lift you up, comment, and subscribe, you're not alone and your story matters. Trust me, if you're tired of being the underdog, if you're yearning for that moment when the tables finally turn, this story will change how you see family success and the quiet power of playing the long game forever. To understand why that fateful dinner became my breaking point, you need to understand the tapestry of my life woven with threads of quiet observation and even quieter ambition, all set against a backdrop of carefully constructed family narratives. I grew up in a comfortable middle-class home in a bustling city. My father, a brilliant engineer, ran his own small firm. My mother, a former teacher, dedicated her life to her family, and more specifically to upholding a certain image of familial perfection. And then there was Olivia. Olivia, my older sister by 2 years, was the sun around which our family's solar system seemed to revolve. She was everything I wasn't. Outgoing, conventionally attractive, and adept at mirroring our mother's aspirations for social standing. From as early as I can remember, the script was written, Olivia was destined for greatness, the kind of greatness you could frame on a wall or boast about at dinner parties. I, on the other hand, was Sarah. Quiet Sarah. Bookish Sarah. The one who preferred sketching building designs in her notebook to attending ballet classes, the one whose achievements, however significant to me, often went unnoticed or worse, were subtly downplayed. I remember when I was 10, I won a citywide science competition. I'd spent months building a miniature eco-friendly house model, complete with solar panels and a rainwater harvesting system. I was so proud. When I brought home the trophy, a gleaming gold cup, Olivia had just received a participation ribbon for a school play. Mom gushed about Olivia's budding theatrical talent for what felt like hours, the ribbon taking pride of place on the mantelpiece. My trophy, it ended up on a dusty shelf in my room, a silent testament to my niche interests. Dad, to his credit, gave me a proud smile and a pat on the head, but he rarely challenged Mom's narrative. His discomfort with conflict often translated into a passive acceptance of the status quo. Another example, Olivia's high school graduation party was an extravagant affair, a veritable who's who of our parents' social circle. When I graduated 2 years later with honors and a scholarship to a prestigious university for architecture, a passion I'd nurtured in secret, my celebration was a small family dinner overshadowed by Olivia's complaints about her first soul-crushing internship. The scholarship, Mom had said, was nice, dear, but make sure you meet a nice young man at university, too. The implication was clear. My academic achievements were secondary to the traditional milestones they envisioned for their daughters. Milestones Olivia was already ticking off with performative enthusiasm. Even our physical appearances were contrasted. Olivia, with her blonde hair and blue eyes mirroring Mom's, was constantly praised for her classic beauty. I, with my darker hair and more introspective gaze, was often told I was interesting looking, a backhanded compliment that only highlighted my perceived deviation from their ideal. Mom would often sigh and say, "Sarah, dear, you'd be so pretty if you just smiled more," or, "Why don't you let Olivia help you with your clothes? She has such an eye for these things." The favoritism wasn't always malicious, not in an overt, cruel way. It was more insidious, a constant undercurrent of comparison that chipped away at my self-worth. Olivia wasn't necessarily a bad person in her youth, but she absorbed the family's narrative like a sponge. She learned early on that her achievements, however small, would be magnified, while mine would be minimized. This cultivated in her a sense of entitlement and a casual condescension towards me that only grew sharper with age. James, her husband, fit seamlessly into this dynamic. He came from a family with connections, his father being Marcus Sterling, a senior partner at a prominent law firm, Sterling and Associates. James himself worked in a field tangentially related to his father's firm, a position that seemed more a product of nepotism than merit. He was as obsessed with appearances and status as Olivia, and together they formed a united front of quiet and sometimes not so quiet judgment. My parents, I believe, loved me in their own way, but their love was often filtered through their own anxieties and societal pressures. Mom especially was deeply concerned with how our family was perceived. Olivia's conventional success, the corporate job, the well-connected husband, the designer clothes, was a reflection of her own perceived success as a mother. My path, less conventional, and for a long time deliberately obscured by me, was a source of quiet worry, and I suspect embarrassment. Dad, an engineer with a logical mind, sometimes seemed to see glimpses of my potential, the meticulous planning in my hobbies, but his voice was often drowned out by Mom's louder anxieties and Olivia's more dramatic pronouncements. He was a tenant in one of my buildings, though he didn't know it, and I often wondered what he'd think if he knew his struggling daughter was his landlord. The irony wasn't lost on me. These early experiences, this constant subtle invalidation, didn't crush me. Instead, they forged in me a quiet resilience, a fierce independence, and a burning desire to prove my worth, not to them, but to myself. And so while they saw me floundering, I was meticulously, secretly building a world of my own, brick by brick, deal by deal. A world they couldn't imagine, let alone enter, without an invitation. An invitation that after years of silent endurance was about to be explosively delivered. The years between my early adulthood and that fateful dinner were a masterclass in pattern establishment. A relentless cycle of family gatherings punctuated by Olivia's boasts and my family's sympathetic, pitying glances in my direction. Each milestone I crossed, each silent victory I achieved in my burgeoning real estate career remained a secret shared only with my fiercely loyal assistant, Ms. Wilson, and a handful of trusted legal and financial advisors. To my family, I was still Sarah, the one finding her way. I remember my 30th birthday. Olivia had just announced her engagement to James. The family dinner, ostensibly for me, quickly turned into an impromptu engagement celebration. Olivia flashed her ostentatious diamond ring, detailing her elaborate wedding plans, while I received a well-meaning but utterly clueless gift from my parents, a gift certificate for a career counseling session. "Just to help you get some clarity, dear," Mom had said, her voice laced with that familiar blend of concern and disappointment. I was already managing a portfolio worth several $1 million by then. I just smiled a tight, polite smile that had become my armor. My internal monologue during these years was a turbulent sea of frustration, hurt, and a simmering, righteous anger. Why can't they see me? Why do they need me to be this person, this failure in their story? I'd ask myself late at night, staring at the intricate blueprints of my next project. But then a steely resolve would kick in. Their validation is not the prize, Sarah. Your success is. It was a mantra I repeated often. Olivia's career, the one she climbed the corporate ladder in, was, from what I could gather from her vague descriptions, more about networking and office politics than actual substance. Yet every minor promotion, every departmental award she received was trumpeted as a monumental achievement. I recall one Christmas Eve, Olivia held court dramatically recounting how she'd saved $1 million account with her quick thinking. The story involved a lot of name-dropping and very few verifiable details. My parents hung on her every word, their faces beaming with pride. Later that evening, when I quietly mentioned I'd just closed on my first commercial property, a modest office building that I'd renovated and leased out fully within 6 months, Olivia had snorted, "Oh, Sarah's still playing with your little houses? That's cute. Make sure you're not getting in over your head with those investment courses." James had chuckled patronizingly, adding, "Yeah, real estate is a tough game, Sarah. Better leave it to the big boys." The sting of those words, the casual dismissal, was sharper than ever. I remember excusing myself and retreating to the guest room, my fists clenched. Ms. Wilson, bless her soul, had texted me a simple message that night. "Anderson Holdings Q4 profits are up 20%. You are not playing with little houses, Ms. Anderson. You are building an empire." Her words were a balm to my wounded spirit. Ms. Wilson had come into my life about 5 years into my secret career. I'd hired her as a property manager, but her sharp intellect, unwavering professionalism, and quiet discretion quickly made her indispensable. She was the only person who knew the full extent of my operations, the CEO of Anderson Holdings, the owner of a rapidly expanding portfolio. She never pried into my family life, but I sensed she understood. She was a witness to my quiet, relentless work ethic, and her belief in me was a silent anchor. There were countless other instances. The time I bought my first car, a reliable, fuel-efficient sedan perfectly aligned with my struggling persona. Olivia had just leased a brand-new luxury SUV financed to the hilt, I suspected, and spent an entire Sunday lunch explaining the intricacies of its sound system, occasionally glancing at my sensible little car with unconcealed pity. Or the family vacations where Olivia and James would stay in lavish suites while I'd book a modest room playing my part, all the while knowing I could buy the entire hotel if I wished. The psychological impact was profound. I became a master of compartmentalization. There was Sarah Anderson, the quiet, underachieving daughter and sister. And then there was SSA, the anonymous, powerful CEO of Anderson Holdings. Sometimes the lines blurred, and a wave of exhaustion would wash over me. The effort of maintaining the facade, of absorbing their judgment without cracking, was immense. The most recent major disappointment, the one that perhaps primed me for the eventual explosion, was my father's 60th birthday. I'd wanted to do something truly special for him. I knew his engineering firm, the one he'd poured his life into, was struggling with rising rents in their current office space. I'd anonymously arranged for his firm to secure a new, larger, beautifully renovated office in a prime downtown building, one of mine, of course, at a significantly reduced rate. I'd even made sure the lease terms were incredibly favorable. I did it through a series of intermediaries, ensuring my involvement remained hidden. I just wanted to see him happy, relieved of that financial burden. At his birthday dinner, Dad was indeed beaming. He spoke with genuine excitement about the miraculous new office space his firm had found. "It's like a gift from heaven," Sarah, he'd said to me, his eyes shining. "The landlord is some big corporation, Anderson Holdings, I think. Very professional, very efficient." I felt a quiet surge of pride. But then Olivia chimed in, "Oh, Daddy, that's wonderful. James and I were actually thinking of helping you find a new space. James knows some people you know. But I'm glad it worked out. Maybe now you can finally afford to retire comfortably." She then turned to me, "Sarah, you should really try to save up more. You don't want to be a burden on Mom and Dad when they're older." That was it. The casual cruelty, the implication that I, the one who had just anonymously saved his company tens of thousands of dollars, was the potential burden. My carefully constructed dam of patience began to crack. The pressure that had been building for a decade was reaching a critical point. Little did Olivia know the ground beneath her feet was about to shift, quite literally, and this time I wouldn't be the one left standing in the rubble. The weeks following my father's birthday dinner were a blur of escalating tension, at least internally. Externally, I maintained my composure, but inside a storm was brewing. Olivia's condescension seemed to reach new heights, fueled perhaps by her own insecurities, or simply by the years of unchecked entitlement. The monthly family dinners, once a source of mild annoyance, now felt like walking into a psychological minefield. The first wave of escalation came during a casual phone call with Mom. She was subtly probing about my job prospects. "Sarah, dear." She began, her voice dripping with concern. "Olivia mentioned there might be an entry-level position opening up in her company's marketing department. It wouldn't pay much, of course, but it would be a start, something stable." I politely declined, stating I was pursuing some promising leads with my investment courses. Mom sighed, a sound I knew all too well. "Well, don't leave it too long, dear. You're not getting any younger." The conversation left a bitter taste in my mouth. My promising leads at that point involved negotiating the acquisition of a multi-story commercial building in the heart of the financial district, a deal worth tens of millions. The second wave hit when James, during a rare encounter at a local coffee shop, I was there for a quick caffeine fix, he was presumably networking, spotted me. He sauntered over, a smug look on his face. "Sarah, fancy seeing you here. Still hustling with those courses? Look, I know a guy who runs a small admin agency. Maybe I could put in a word for you, get you some real-world experience." He delivered this with the air of someone bestowing a great favor. I managed a tight smile and a non-committal, "Thanks, James, I'll keep that in mind," before excusing myself, the condescension clinging to me like cheap cologne. My real-world experience that week included overseeing the final stages of renovation on the Phoenix, a luxury mixed-use development that was already generating significant buzz in the city. I began to delve deeper into my parents' own histories, trying to understand the genesis of their biases. My mother grew up in a family where appearances were paramount. Her own mother had been a relentless social climber, instilling in her daughters the importance of marrying well and maintaining a flawless public image. My father, on the other hand, came from a more humble background. He was a self-made man, valuing hard work and intellect, but he'd also witnessed his own father struggle with financial insecurity. This, I realized, likely fueled his anxiety about my perceived lack of a proper job, even if he admired my interesting mind, as he sometimes put it. Their motivations weren't born of malice, but of their own ingrained fears and aspirations, which they projected onto Olivia and me in distinctly different ways. Olivia, the walking embodiment of Mom's dreams. Me, a constant reminder of Dad's anxieties. The third wave of escalation was more direct. Olivia called me, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "Sarah, you will never guess James and I just got approved for an apartment in the Mason. It's the most exclusive new building in the city. The views are to die for. The amenities are insane. It's a total game changer for us, socially speaking." She paused, clearly expecting me to be suitably awestruck. "Of course," she added, her voice dropping into that familiar tone of pity, "it's wildly expensive. We're really stretching ourselves, but you only live once, right? Maybe one day, if you really buckle down, you could afford a tiny studio there, or, somewhere nearby. The Mason, my flagship residential project, the jewel in Anderson Holdings' crown. I had personally overseen every detail of its design and construction, from the Italian marble in the lobby to the custom-designed fixtures in each apartment. My own penthouse office, from which I ran my entire empire, occupied the top floor, offering panoramic views of the city, views Olivia was now so ecstatic about. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. My internal transformation was accelerating. The years of quiet endurance were giving way to a cold, hard anger, a resolve to not just reveal the truth, but to make them understand the depth of their misjudgment. It was no longer just about my own vindication. It was about shattering the carefully constructed artifice of their world, an artifice built in part on my silent suffering. Allies and enemies were now starkly defined. Ms. Wilson, my ever-perceptive assistant, noticed the change in me. "Ms. Anderson," she said one afternoon, her gaze steady, "you seem different, more focused. Is everything all right?" I simply nodded. "Everything is about to be, Ms. Wilson. Everything is about to be." She didn't press further, but her unspoken support was a source of strength. Olivia and James, with their relentless condescension, had solidified their roles as the antagonists in my story. My parents. I still held out a sliver of hope but their passive complicity was becoming increasingly difficult to forgive. The stakes were raised significantly with Olivia's move to the Mason. She would be living in my building, unknowingly paying rent to her struggling little sister. The upcoming monthly family dinner was scheduled to be held at my parents' house, and Olivia had already declared she would be hosting a pre-dinner celebratory drink at her new apartment in the Mason. The thought of her preening in my building, oblivious to the truth, was both infuriating and perversely a little thrilling. This was the opportunity I hadn't consciously sought, but which fate, it seemed, had delivered on a silver platter. The fourth wave, or perhaps it was the final tremor before the earthquake, came a few days before the dinner. I received an email from Olivia, a group email sent to the entire family with the subject line, "Housewarming drinks at the Mason. Prepare to be amazed." Attached was a link to a glossy online brochure for the Mason, highlighting its unparalleled luxury and exclusive lifestyle. She'd even added a little note at the bottom, "Sarah Sweetie, maybe seeing a place like this will inspire you to aim higher." That winking emoji, that was the spark. The casual, almost gleeful cruelty of it. My breaking point wasn't a dramatic explosion of emotion, not yet. It was a sudden chilling calm, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The game was over. I wasn't just going to reveal the truth, I was going to orchestrate it. The cliffhanger wasn't a dramatic event, but a quiet internal one. As I stared at Olivia's email, a slow smile spread across my face. "Oh, Olivia," I whispered to the empty room, "you have no idea what you've just done." The upcoming family dinner wasn't just going to be a dinner, it was going to be a reckoning. And I, Sarah Anderson, the struggling one, was going to be the one conducting it. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that was left was for the curtain to rise. The day of the family dinner arrived cloaked in an almost surreal calm. I spent the morning in my actual home, a meticulously restored Victorian mansion on the city's historic registry, a place my family had no idea existed. They pictured me in a cramped rented studio, not amidst sprawling gardens and rooms filled with art and stories. This quiet sanctuary was my true self, a stark contrast to the diminished version they saw. As I dressed for the evening, choosing a simple but elegant black dress, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were an actress preparing for a pivotal role. The role of myself finally unmasked. The trigger event, the one Olivia had so blithely set in motion, was her planned pre-dinner housewarming at the Mason. I knew she intended it as a display of her superior status, a way to rub her perceived success in my face yet again. Little did she know she was walking directly into my domain. My decision to take action wasn't impulsive. It was the culmination of a decade of suppressed frustration, of carefully laid plans, finally aligning with an unmissable opportunity. The investment courses they mocked, they were real estate development seminars, finance workshops, negotiation masterclasses, the building blocks of Anderson Holdings. My struggling lifestyle, it was a deliberate shield protecting my focus, my investments, and frankly, my sanity. But the shield had become a cage, and it was time to break free. The planning and preparation phase was surprisingly simple. It involved one crucial phone call. As I drove towards the Mason, I dialed Ms. Wilson. "Ms. Wilson," I said, my voice even, "I need you to do something for me. It's personal." "Of course, Ms. Anderson. What do you need?" Her calm professionalism was a steadying presence. "My sister Olivia Sterling is currently a tenant in apartment 25B at the Mason. I believe her lease is up for renewal in 2 months. Yes, I have her file here. Olivia Sterling Nee Anderson. Lease renewal pending. I want you to ensure that her lease is not renewed under any circumstances." There was a brief pause on the other end. Then Ms. Wilson replied, her voice devoid of surprise, "Consider it done, Ms. Anderson. Are there any specific grounds you'd like me to cite?" "No grounds necessary for now, Ms. Wilson. Just non-renewal. And one more thing. Please be available on your phone in about, say, an hour. I might need you to confirm something for my family." "I will be on standby, Ms. Anderson." "Thank you, Ms. Wilson. You're invaluable." "It's my job, Ms. Anderson, and if I may, good luck." I smiled. "Thank you. I think I'm about to make my own." Arriving at the Mason, I bypassed the main entrance using my owner's access card to enter through a private elevator that led directly to the residential floors. I found Olivia in the lobby, already holding court with Mom and Dad James, hovering proudly beside her. She was dressed in a designer outfit that screamed, "Look at me!" Her voice loud and animated as she described the sheer opulence of her new home. When she spotted me, her face momentarily registered surprise at my slightly more polished appearance, then settled back into its usual condescending pity. "Oh, Sarah, you made it good. Come on, you have to see this place. It'll blow your mind." She led the way, chattering incessantly about the concierge service, the rooftop pool, the celebrity architect who designed the building, a man I'd had several very productive, albeit challenging meetings with. As we stepped into her apartment, admittedly a beautifully appointed space as all units in the Mason were, she gestured grandly. "Well, what do you think? Isn't it incredible? We're on the 25th floor. The views are just chef's kiss." Mom and Dad oohed and awed appropriately. James puffed out his chest. Olivia looked directly at me, a smirk playing on her lips. "It's a far cry from your little rental, isn't it? Sarah still paying rent at your age, tisk, tisk. Honestly, if you hadn't wasted so much time on those silly investment courses, maybe you could afford something better by now, even a tiny place of your own." There it was, the trigger, the final patronizing straw. My internal monologue, which had been a low hum of anticipation, now sharpened into a single clear thought. Now. A slow smile spread across my face. "Actually, Olivia," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. "It's funny you mention the Mason. It is a rather impressive building, isn't it?" Olivia, mistaking my smile for admiration, preened. "Isn't it just, we were so lucky to get in. There's a waiting list a mile long, you know." "Oh, I know," I replied, my smile widening. "I know all about the waiting list. You see, Olivia, I own the Mason." The silence that followed was so profound you could hear a pin drop. Olivia's smile froze, then faltered. Mom and Dad stared at me, their expressions unreadable. James blinked as if he hadn't heard correctly. What did you say?" Olivia stammered, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "That's not funny, Sarah." "I'm not trying to be funny, Olivia," I said, my voice still quiet, but now carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "I own this building. All of it. Anderson Holdings, that's my company." I pulled out my phone. "In fact, let me just confirm something." I put my phone on speaker and dialed Ms. Wilson. "Ms. Wilson, good evening. It's Sarah Anderson." "Good evening, Ms. Anderson. How can I help you?" Ms. Wilson's crisp professional voice filled the sudden stillness of the apartment. "Ms. Wilson, could you please confirm for my family the ownership structure of the Mason Luxury Apartment Complex?" "Certainly, Ms. Anderson. The Mason is wholly owned by Anderson Holdings, of which you, Sarah Anderson, are the sole proprietor and CEO." Olivia's face had gone deathly pale. James looked like he was about to choke. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dad just stared, his jaw slack. "And Ms. Wilson," I continued, my gaze fixed on Olivia, "regarding the lease for apartment 25B currently occupied by Ms. Olivia Sterling, what were my instructions?" "Your instructions were clear, Ms. Anderson. The lease for apartment 25B is not to be renewed. The tenant will be formally notified in accordance with the terms of the current lease agreement." I looked at Olivia, whose eyes were now wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. "So, Olivia," I said, my voice soft but firm, "enjoy your apartment while you can, because in 2 months you'll need to find somewhere else to live. Somewhere within your actual budget, perhaps." The truth bomb had detonated, and the fallout was just beginning. The game had indeed changed, and I was holding all the cards. The ensuing moments in Olivia's soon-to-be former luxury apartment were a chaotic symphony of shock and disbelief. The revelation of my ownership of the Mason and the immediate, tangible consequence for Olivia hung in the air like a physical entity. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was the shattering of a decade-old narrative, a complete reversal of the power dynamics that had defined our family for as long as I could remember. Olivia was the first to break the stunned silence. You can't be serious, Sarah." Her voice was a high-pitched squeak, a stark contrast to her earlier confident pronouncements. "This is some kind of sick joke. Mom, Dad, tell her to stop." Mom looked utterly bewildered, her eyes darting between me and Olivia. "Sarah, dear, is this true?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Every word, Mom," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "Anderson Holdings is mine. The Mason is mine. And Olivia's lease will not be renewed." James, who had been gaping like a fish out of water, finally found his voice, a spluttering, indignant sound. "This is outrageous. You can't just evict us. There are laws. My father is Marcus Sterling. He'll what, James?" I cut him off, in my tone icy. "Sue me, Marcus Sterling of Sterling and Associates." That's an interesting thought, because you see, Sterling and Associates also happens to be a tenant in one of my buildings, a rather large, very expensive office space in the downtown financial district, if I recall correctly. Their lease is up for renewal in 6 months. I let that sink in. I wonder how Mr. Sterling would feel if his firm suddenly found itself looking for new premises on very short notice, perhaps due to unforeseen circumstances with the building's ownership. James's face turned an alarming shade of puce. He looked at Olivia, then at his father-in-law, his bravado deflating like a punctured balloon. The connections he so often relied on were suddenly a liability. Dad, who had been silent up to this point, finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, filled with a dawning understanding, and I thought a flicker of something else. Perhaps respect. "Sarah, all this time, those investment courses, this is what you were doing," I nodded. "Yes, Dad, for the past 10 years. While everyone thought I was struggling, I was building, brick by brick, deal by deal. Anderson Holdings is now worth over $40 million. I own residential complexes, commercial towers, retail spaces, a diversified portfolio." I paused, then looked directly at him. "Your engineering firm, Dad, the one in that wonderful new office space you were so happy about, Anderson Holdings is your landlord too. I arranged that lease for you. Anonymously, of course." Dad sank onto one of Olivia's plush and soon-to-be relocated armchairs, his face a mask of astonishment. I had no idea," he murmured, shaking his head. $40 million? Mom was now openly weeping. "Oh, Sarah, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us treat you like that?" Her voice was choked with a mixture of guilt and confusion. "Why, Mom?" I asked, the years of hurt finally surfacing in my voice, though it remained steady. "Because you never asked. You never looked beyond the surface, beyond the narrative you'd created for me. You were too busy celebrating Olivia's success, too concerned with appearances to see what was right in front of you." My gaze shifted back to Olivia, who was now staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated desperation. The condescension was gone, replaced by a raw, frantic fear. "Sarah, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "You can't do this. Where will we go? We can't afford anything like this on our own." "Not really. We stretched so much. It was all for show." The admission hung in the air, a pathetic confession of her own carefully constructed facade. "That's not my concern, Olivia," I said, my voice devoid of malice but firm. "You made your choices. You chose to live beyond your means, to prioritize appearances over substance, and you chose repeatedly to belittle me, to dismiss me, to treat me as less than. For 10 years I endured it. 10 years of your condescending remarks, your pitying glances, your smug satisfaction in my supposed failure." My voice rose slightly, imbued with the righteous anger I had suppressed for so long. "Do you have any idea what that felt like, Olivia? To be constantly undermined by my own sister? To have my every quiet effort mocked, while your every mediocre achievement was lauded as genius?" The room was silent again, save for Mom's quiet sobs. This wasn't a public humiliation in front of a large crowd of strangers, but in the intimate theater of our family, it was a profound and total unmasking. The carefully curated image of the successful Olivia and the struggling Sarah had been irrevocably shattered. My moment of triumph wasn't loud or boastful. It was a quiet, steely satisfaction. The satisfaction of finally speaking my truth, of reclaiming my power, of seeing the scales of justice so long tipped against me finally balance. Olivia looked broken. James looked terrified. Mom looked ashamed. Dad looked thoughtful. Shocked, yes, but also, I dared to hope, impressed. "The dinner at your parents' house is probably off," I said, my voice returning to its calm, measured tone. "I think we all have a lot to process." I turned to leave. At the door, I paused. "Olivia," I said without turning back, "I'll have Ms. Wilson send you a list of properties currently managed by Anderson Holdings, properties that are actually within your budget. Consider it a parting gift." And then I walked out, leaving behind the wreckage of their illusions and stepping fully into the light of my own hard-won reality. Justice, I realized, wasn't just served. It was a 5-course meal, and they were finally getting a taste of what they'd been dishing out for years. The air outside the Mason felt cleaner, lighter. I took a deep breath, the first breath of a new chapter. The days immediately following the Mason revelation, as I privately termed it, were a whirlwind of emotional fallout and frantic attempts at damage control from my family. The initial shockwave had subsided, replaced by a series of desperate maneuvers, and in some quarters a dawning uncomfortable respect. Olivia and James were as expected in full panic mode. My phone was bombarded with calls and texts from Olivia, a torrent of apologies, excuses, and desperate pleas. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I was just insecure. Please, you can't kick us out. Think of my reputation. What will people say?" Her messages were a pathetic blend of self-pity and a complete lack of understanding of the depth of the hurt she had inflicted. James, after his initial bluster, had gone silent, likely terrified of the implications for his father's law firm. Good. A little fear can be a powerful motivator for change. Mom, true to her nature, attempted to mediate, or rather to smooth things over and restore the family's fractured image. She called me multiple times, her voice wavering between tearful remorse and a subtle pressure to be the bigger person. "Sarah, darling, your sister is distraught. She made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but she's still your sister. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive her? Maybe reconsider the lease." My response was firm, but calm. "Mom," I said during one such call, "this isn't about a single mistake. This is about a decade of consistent behavior. Forgiveness is a process, and it doesn't mean erasing the consequences of one's actions. Olivia needs to understand that actions have consequences, and frankly, so do you and Dad for enabling it." I set clear boundaries. I would not discuss Olivia's lease further. I needed space. Dad's reaction was more complex and to me more hopeful. He called me a few days later, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Sarah, I'm still trying to process everything. $40 million. You built that all by yourself." There was an undeniable note of awe in his voice. "I always knew you were smart, Sarah. Too quiet maybe, but smart. I guess I didn't really see you." He paused. "Your mother and we messed up. I messed up. I should have stood up for you more." It wasn't a full apology, not yet, but it was a start, a crack in the wall of his long-standing passivity. I told him I appreciated his honesty and that perhaps in time we could talk more. Support came from an unexpected yet deeply appreciated source, Ms. Wilson. She handled the official notification to Olivia regarding the lease non-renewal with her usual impeccable efficiency. But beyond her professional duties, she offered a quiet, unwavering support. "Ms. Anderson," she said during one of our meetings, "you did what you had to do. Never apologize for protecting your peace or for demanding the respect you deserve." Her words, delivered with her characteristic calm, resonated deeply. She was more than an assistant. She was a confidant, a silent champion of my journey. There weren't any immediate widespread social media reactions, as this was a private family drama. However, Olivia's world, so heavily reliant on social appearances, was certainly imploding. I could only imagine the humiliation she felt knowing her exclusive apartment was owned by the sister she'd belittled, and that she was being, for all intents and purposes, evicted. Her desperate attempts to salvage her image within her social circle would likely be a painful and public lesson in humility. Karma, in Olivia's case, was delivering a very personal, very targeted blow to her inflated ego. In the short term, the family dynamics were irrevocably altered. The old hierarchy was shattered. Olivia and James were stripped of their perceived superiority. Mom was forced to confront her own complicity and her shallow values. Dad was beginning a journey of reevaluation, and I was finally free. Free from the burden of their expectations, free from the need to hide, free to be unapologetically myself. Emotionally, I was a strange mix of exhausted and exhilarated. The confrontation had been draining, dredging up years of buried pain. But there was also a profound sense of release, of triumph. Not a gloating triumph, but the quiet, powerful satisfaction of having stood up for myself, of having reclaimed my narrative. I spent a lot of time in my Victorian mansion, my true sanctuary, reflecting. I walked through my gardens, sat in my library filled with books on architecture and finance, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The victory wasn't just about the money or the power, it was about self-respect. It was about finally, definitively choosing myself. The road ahead with my family was uncertain. But one thing was crystal clear: Sarah Anderson, the struggling one, was gone. In her place stood Sarah Anderson, CEO, empire builder, and a woman who would no longer tolerate being underestimated. 2 years passed. 2 years of profound change, growth, and yes, a healthy dose of karma. Life didn't just return to normal. It found a new, more authentic, and far more fulfilling equilibrium. My life professionally and personally had blossomed in the open. Anderson Holdings continued to thrive, expanding into sustainable development projects, something I was deeply passionate about. I was no longer the anonymous CEO, but Sarah Anderson, a recognized name in the city's business and philanthropic circles. I even did a few carefully selected interviews sharing my story, the sanitized, business-focused version of course, to inspire other young women in business. My Victorian mansion was no longer a secret. I hosted charity galas in its gardens, its restored beauty a testament to my love for history and architecture. I was living my truth openly and joyfully. And what of my family? The antagonists of my story. Karma, as they say, didn't just come for them, it brought an entire army of consequences tailored to their specific brand of hubris. Olivia and James had a rough couple of years. Losing the apartment in the Mason was a significant blow to their carefully constructed image. They scrambled to find new accommodation, eventually settling for a much smaller, far less glamorous apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, something genuinely within their means. The list of properties Ms. Wilson had sent Olivia, all well-maintained and affordable units owned by Anderson Holdings, had been, I heard through the grapevine, a source of intense humiliation for her, though she eventually had to swallow her pride and rent one. James's career took a hit too. His father, Marcus Sterling, while not losing his firm's office space. I wasn't a monster, just someone who demanded respect. His lease was renewed, albeit with a significant rent increase reflecting market rates, which I'd previously subsidized slightly for my father's sake, without anyone knowing, was reportedly furious with James for jeopardizing the firm's stability with his and Olivia's petty family squabbles. James's reliance on connections proved to be a shaky foundation, and he had to actually work for a living, a concept that seemed to genuinely shock him. Olivia, stripped of her primary source of social currency, had to confront her own shallowness. The last I heard, she was working a mid-level marketing job, the kind Mom had once suggested for me, and was, according to Mom, much more grounded these days. Mom had undergone the most significant transformation. The initial shock and shame had given way to a period of deep reflection. She started therapy, something I gently suggested. She began to dismantle her obsession with appearances and started to genuinely try to understand me, Sarah, her daughter, not the projection of her own anxieties. Our relationship was still a work in progress, but it was realer, more honest than it had ever been. She stopped comparing, stopped judging, and started listening. We even had dinner, just the two of us, at my mansion. She looked around not with envy, but with a quiet wonder. "You built all this, Sarah," she said, tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become, and so deeply sorry for the times I failed to see you." That apology, heartfelt and unreserved, meant more to me than any financial success. Dad, true to his nature, expressed his pride in a more understated way. He started calling me regularly, asking about my projects, genuinely interested in the details of my work. He even started boasting about his mogul daughter to his engineering buddies. His firm continued to thrive in the office space I'd provided, and he knew it was me. It created a new bond between us, a shared understanding based on mutual respect. He once said to me, "You know, Sarah, I always worried about you not having a safety net. Turns out you were the safety net for all of us in some ways." As for my own relationships, I had cultivated a strong support system of genuine friends and trusted colleagues. Ms. Wilson remained my steadfast right hand, her role expanding as Anderson Holdings grew. I even started dating again cautiously at first, but with a newfound confidence in my own worth and a clearer understanding of what I wanted in a partner, someone who valued intelligence, kindness, and authenticity above all else. The family dinners, they still happened occasionally, but the dynamic was entirely different. They were on my terms now, often hosted at my home. Olivia was quieter, more subdued, and dare I say nicer. James was practically invisible. The conversations were more balanced, more respectful. There was no more condescension, no more pitying glances. Just a family fractured and flawed, but slowly, tentatively healing. Reflecting on the journey, I realized the most profound lesson wasn't about the sweetness of revenge, though there was a certain satisfaction in seeing justice served. It was about the power of self-belief, the importance of defining your own worth, and the courage to live authentically even when it's easier to hide. The truth didn't just set me free, it rebuilt me stronger and more resilient than I ever thought possible. My empire wasn't just made of bricks and mortar, it was built on a foundation of quiet determination and an unwavering commitment to my own vision. And that I knew was a legacy worth far more than $40 million. So what's the deep moral of this crazy decade-long saga? I think there are a few. Firstly, never let anyone else define your worth. Not your family, not your friends, not society. Your value is inherent and your path is your own. Secondly, silence can be a source of strength, a place to cultivate your dreams, but there comes a time when you must speak your truth, especially when your silence enables disrespect. And finally, what goes around doesn't just come around, it multiplies. The energy you put out into the world, whether it's kindness and hard work or condescension and judgment, will eventually find its way back to you, often in unexpected and profound ways. Have you ever felt like the invisible child or the underestimated one in your family or workplace? How did you navigate that? What was your Mason revelation moment, or are you still waiting for it? I'd love to hear your stories. So drop a comment below. Let's build a community where we support each other's journeys to being seen and valued for who we truly are. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of resilience and the sweet taste of long overdue justice, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and hit that subscribe button. I have so many more stories and lessons learned from my journey of building an empire from scratch while navigating the complexities of life and family, and I can't wait to share them with you. Remember, your dreams are valid, your voice matters, and your story is powerful. Don't be afraid to own it, to live it, and if necessary, to rewrite the script. You are the CEO of your own life. Act like it. Until next time, keep building your own version of the Mason.